Chapter 631. Your Highness. Seeing this scene, Bai Xian hurriedly turned around. This servant did not see anything. She hurriedly knelt down. Gu Shengyin was amused. Qin Ke also let go of her, as if nothing had happened between the two. I am going back to rest. Your Highness, Prince of Yong, you should also rest early. Qin Ke nodded reservedly, watching the master and servant walk away. When the two of them were out of sight, he stretched out his hand and gently touched his left ear. The boiling temperature showed that the owner of this body was not as calm as he appeared to be. Just as she said, Bai Xian didn't see or hear anything. Gu Shengyin liked this kind of subordinate very much. Bai Xian was very clear about her identity and position. This kind of subordinate would save a lot of trouble for her master. It was rare for the Qin dynasty's envoys to come to the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty. The Phoenix Emperor naturally had to keep them for a while to show off the glory of the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty. It was just that the Phoenix Emperor could not lower herself to accompany the envoys. The other party was also a member of the imperial family. It would be more appropriate for the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty to send a princess to accompany the envoys. Before the Phoenix Emperor could decide on a candidate, someone had volunteered. All of them want to accompany the envoys to experience the glory of the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty? The Phoenix Emperor raised her eyebrows. The Crown Prince, the sixth princess, and several young ladies of the imperial family. Even the eighth princess, Huang Minga, who was imprisoned in her residence, expressed their willingness to share the Phoenix Emperor's burden. Thinking of the Prince of Yong's face, which could bring disaster to the country, the Phoenix Emperor could understand their thoughts. The third and fourth princesses had just been engaged and were unwilling to overstep their bounds. Otherwise, there might be a few more names on the list. The Phoenix Emperor glanced at her. She was so biased that she could not even see a shadow. Of course, she could guess the result. Gu Shengyin had been ordered by the Phoenix Emperor to be responsible for receiving, accompanying, and arranging all activities during the visit of the Qin dynasty's envoys. His Highness, Prince of Yong, was indeed a dragon among men. If Chang'e could capture his heart, it would be a great honor for the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty. This was what the Phoenix Emperor thought. The next day, Gu Shengyin arrived at the temporary residence of the Prince of Yong. Your Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, in accordance with my Imperial Majesty's decree, I am responsible for receiving the Great Qin's envoys during this period of time. Qin Ke bowed slightly. Thank you, Your Highness. The two of them were polite and courteous to each other. It was impossible to tell that they had been intimate in the Imperial Garden last night. Today, I will bring everyone around our Phoenix City, Gu Shengyin suggested. Great Qin's ambassadors were quite curious about the customs here, and they all agreed. However, this consort and everyone here needs to change our clothes, Gu Shengyin said. One could only see the real Phoenix City if they were dressed casually. A group of people dressed up and left the palace in a low-key manner. However, being low-key was only relative. After all, Gu Shengyin and Qin Ke Shi were both very attractive. This was especially true for Qin Ke Shi. She had already lost count of the number of enthusiastic onlookers she had received along the way. In the end, he couldn't bear it any longer and accepted the curtain that Gu Shengyin handed to him. Ke Shi, don't mind them. They don't have any ill intentions. They were only subdued by your elegance, Gu Shengyin said, holding back her laughter. If her voice didn't contain such schadenfreude, Qin Ke Shi would be quite willing to believe her. He gnashed his teeth and replied, Chang'e overpraises me. With Chang'e's character and appearance, if she were to go to my Great Qin, I'm afraid that she would receive even worse treatment than me. Chapter 632. Apart from this small interlude, the Great Qin ambassadors were still very satisfied. Sometimes, knowing something was one thing, but seeing it with one's own eyes was another. In this capital city, most of the people walking outside were women. These women were all tall and strong, and some of them were even pushing carts or carrying things. Some of them were even loudly hawking their wares. On the other hand, most of the men on the streets had delicate bodies and delicate faces. Some of them even put on powder on their faces and held handkerchiefs in their hands. The great Qin ambassadors felt that their horizons had been broadened. Looking at the women who were as strong as men, the married ambassadors couldn't help but shudder when they thought of their wives. The great Qin Empire was more suitable for them. It's getting late. There's a special restaurant up ahead. Everyone, please come with me for a meal. Gu Shengyin looked at the time and said. At that moment, there was a commotion in front of them. Gu Shengyin turned around and looked. It seemed that a horse in front of them had suddenly gone crazy and was charging towards the crowd. In that short moment, the horse was already galloping towards the envoys. Be careful. Before Qin Kai could react, he was pulled back and couldn't help but take a few steps back. He subconsciously looked in Gu Shengyin's direction and only relaxed when he saw that she was standing in a safe place. Gu Shengyin's expression became serious. Suddenly, she moved her feet and her body became as light as a swallow. Her figure flashed and she sat firmly on the horse. She lowered her body and pulled the reins with both hands, forcibly stopping the horse's advance. The horse neighed and raised its front hooves high, finally settling down. Gu Shengyin only then noticed that the person on the horse was a young and handsome man. Qin Kai's face turned cold. He looked at Gu Shengyin sitting on the horse. Because she had to pull the reins, her hands were wrapped around the person in front of her. To others, it looked indescribably intimate. He clearly saw the young master's face turn red. Gu Shengyin seemed to have realized the inappropriateness of this posture. She nimbly dismounted from the horse and sternly said to the young man, "Riding is not allowed in the downtown area. It is easy to hurt others. Don't you know this rule?" The young man blushed and mumbled, "Today is the first time I've done this. There's an emergency at home." Seeing his good attitude, Gu Shengyin softened her tone. "No matter what the reason is, rules are rules. You can go to the city patrol office to receive your punishment later." The young master's expression changed, but he still agreed. Gu Shengyin turned around and prepared to leave, but she was stopped by the person behind her. "This young lady, may I ask which family you are from? Tomorrow, I will personally pay you a visit to thank you." When he said this, his face turned red. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that he had fallen in love with her. "Gu Shengyin," she said indifferently, "it's just a small matter, not worth mentioning. Just be careful in the future. As for thanking me, there's no need." The young master left with a bit of disappointment. When Gu Shengyin returned to the envoy's side, she heard Qin Kai's teasing laughter. "I didn't expect that I would see a good show before I even ate the special dishes. Chang'e's play of the hero saving the beauty is really wonderful." It was a compliment, but the jealousy in his tone was not concealed at all. Chapter 633. Gu Shengyin stared blankly for a moment. Soon after, she approached Qin Kai and whispered into his ear, "This empress would like to play the hero saving the damsel in distress with Quebec. Unfortunately, Kai won't give this empress this opportunity." Qin Kai's expression didn't change. If Chang'e is willing to sacrifice her image, this prince is naturally willing to be the hero saving the damsel in distress. As the two whispered to each other, the envoys from the great Qin Empire became extremely worried. Could it be that His Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, had taken a liking to the crown prince of the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty? Although this crown prince had an extraordinary bearing and a rarely seen beauty, making her a perfect match with His Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, however, she was the crown prince of the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty. It was impossible for the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty to allow their crown prince to be married off. Could it be? The envoys were terrified. Could it be that His Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, wanted to marry her off to the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty? Regardless of how uneasy the envoys from the great Qin Empire were, Gu Shengyin and Qin Kai were all smiles. One appeared to be in high spirits, while the other appeared to be in high spirits. In the following days, Gu Shengyin brought the envoys to experience the various sights and sounds of Phoenix City. After a few days, the envoys' impression of the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty changed greatly. Although it was strange for a woman to be the head of a household, the envoys from the Great Qin gradually grew accustomed to the fact that the commoners of the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty lived in prosperity and that the women's ability to earn money was not inferior to that of the men of the Great Qin Empire. However, His Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, and the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty were truly too intimate, giving them a headache. However, the envoys couldn't do anything about His Imperial Highness. The Prince of Yong was the youngest son of the Emperor and Empress of the Great Qin Empire. Above him was his elder brother, who was nearly 10 years older than him, the future monarch of the Great Qin Empire. The three people with the highest status in the Great Qin all doted on His Imperial Highness greatly, granting him almost all of his requests. This had nurtured his uncompromising personality. If he made a decision, the envoys couldn't persuade him otherwise. However, Gu Shangyin felt that although the two were somewhat ambiguous these days, there was no substantial progress. She was very sure that Qin Kai wasn't uninterested in her. If the two of them were given enough time, she was confident that the two of them would naturally be together. However, Qin Kai was still a member of the Qin dynasty. He had only come to Heavenly Phoenix on a diplomatic mission. Sooner or later, he would have to return. Seeing that it was getting closer and closer to the day when Great Qin's envoys would leave, Gu Shangyin felt that she should give them a strong dose of medicine. Night fell. Gu Shangyin avoided the palace servants and arrived at the palace where Qin Kai lived. Coming uninvited in the middle of the night is not the style of a country's crown prince, Qin Kai said with a smile. Gu Shangyin did not smile. Qin Kai felt a little strange. He turned around and saw Gu Shangyin's serious expression. What's wrong? Unconsciously, his expression became serious. Gu Shangyin stared at him without blinking. Kai Shi, you know how I feel about you, don't you? Qin Kai was speechless. He hadn't expected that the other party would say it so bluntly. However, when he thought about it, the women of Heavenly Phoenix weren't as reserved as the women of his empire. He didn't answer. Instead, he smiled carelessly and asked, "What does your Imperial Highness wish to say?" He saw that when he asked this question, a trace of disappointment appeared on the other party's face. This caused his heart to tremble, and a trace of unease quietly spread through him. Gu Shangyin stared at him and asked seriously, "Kai Shi, if I were to propose marriage to you as an official monarch, would you be willing to accept?" Chapter 634. Qin Kai looked into the other party's dark and affectionate eyes. He could clearly see his own reflection in them. He could see the anticipation and adoration in Gu Shangyin's eyes. Inexplicably, Qin Kai felt that his answer would be very important. But after a long silence, he said softly, "Chang'e, if I ask you to put down everything in the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty and return to the Great Qin with me, would you be willing?" He saw that after he said this, the light in the other party's eyes dimmed. Qin Kai suddenly had the urge to take back what he had just said, but he didn't. Gu Shangyin smiled and said easily, "I was just joking with you. Kai, you know that I can't leave the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty." She raised her head and looked out the window, saying, "It's getting late. You should rest early." Finished speaking, she turned and left. Qin Kai looked at her back. She was tall and straight, but she exuded a sense of loneliness. He shook his head and laughed inwardly. How could someone as arrogant and unrestrained as Chang'e be lonely? But the next day, the official who came to receive the Great Qin's envoy changed. Qin Kai's heart jumped, asking why His Highness the Crown Prince hadn't come. The official smiled and replied, "His Highness the Crown Prince is busy. His Majesty has ordered that I will be in charge of everyone's affairs for the rest of the day." Qin Kai smiled politely, wondering if the other party was unhappy because of last night's events. At worst, the next time he saw her, what would happen after seeing her? Qin Kai hadn't thought about this question. But in the following days, he didn't see Gu Shangyin again. Even when he personally went to Clear Phoenix Palace, the news he received was that the Crown Prince wasn't there. No matter how slow he was, Qin Kai understood that Chang'e didn't want to see him. He was also arrogant. Since the other party didn't want to see him, he wasn't willing to put down his face and stick close to her. In the main hall of Clear Phoenix Palace, Gu Shengyin was dressed in plain white robes. She asked Bai Xian, who had just entered, "Has she left?" Bai Xian answered yes. She did not understand. From the looks of it, His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince had feelings for His Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong. Why did he not meet him? Of course, this was not a question she should ask. She could only hide it in the bottom of her heart. Great Qin's ambassadors will be leaving in a few days, right? Gu Shengyin suddenly asked. Bai Xian replied respectfully, "Yes, Your Highness. There are less than 5 days left." Gu Shengyin raised her head and drank a glass of wine with waning interest. "Qin Ke Shi, let's see if you can really harden your heart and leave when the time comes." 2 more days passed like this. Qin Ke suddenly realized that the palace was bustling with activity. All the palace servants were in a hurry. Out of curiosity, he stopped a palace servant and asked, "Is there something big going on in the palace?" That palace servant's face reddened for a moment when she suddenly met his gaze. She paused for a moment before replying, "Yes, His Highness the Phoenix Crown Prince is currently choosing a successor for His Highness the Crown Prince. Our Clear Phoenix Palace will have a new master very soon." Qin Ke only felt a rumbling sound, as if something had exploded in his mind. Successor? She was actually preparing for a wedding? A flame of fury rose from the bottom of his heart, dyeing his eyes red. A few days ago, she had solemnly vowed to tell him her feelings. Now, she wanted to marry the successor? Qin Ke she walked towards Clear Phoenix Palace with a cold expression. Chapter 635. I am looking for Your Imperial Highness, the Crown Prince. Qin Ke coldly spoke to the palace servant. The servant smiled respectfully. "Unfortunately, Your Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong. Our Imperial Highness has some urgent matters to attend to." Qin Ke sneered. "He's not here again?" He didn't care. The servant was about to force his way in. The servant panicked. "Your Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, what are you doing? Trespassing into Clear Phoenix Palace is a major crime." Imperial bodyguards had already come over to stop Qin Quebec. While they were still in a deadlock, Bai Xian walked out from inside. "Everyone, stop." Bai Xian glanced at Qin Ke, respectfully saying, "Your Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, our Imperial Highness invites you in." Qin Ke followed her into Clear Phoenix Palace with a cold expression. Arriving at the entrance to the main hall, Bai Xian tactfully stopped in her tracks. "His Imperial Highness is inside." Qin Ke stepped in. The first thing he saw was the woman drinking wine at the head of the hall. She was wearing a loose white robe and her hair was loose. She had a bit of a scholarly air about her. Seeing him enter, Gu Shengyin smiled. "Ke Shi, you've come. Accompany me for a drink." Qin Ke seriously sized her up. This woman's current appearance was different from all the other appearances he had seen. Unlike His Royal Highness, who was dressed in formal attire, her movements were indescribably flirtatious. Wherever her gaze moved, there was an indescribable charm. Qin Ke couldn't help but admit that this Huang Chonga had the capital to make all men intoxicated. All men, of course, included Qin Quebec. However, he didn't do as Gu Shengyin wished. Instead, he stood there motionlessly, his beautiful face completely frozen. This prince has heard that His Imperial Highness is preparing to marry the Empress? Gu Shengyin stared blankly for a moment before smiling indifferently. "Your Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, is truly well informed." This was an admission. Qin Ke only felt an indescribable flame rise in his heart. Unfortunately, Gu Shengyin was afraid that this fire would not burn enough and added, "It's a pity that His Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, will have already left Heavenly Phoenix. I'm afraid that he will not be able to see that scene." In the next moment, her vision darkened and Qin Ke's face appeared in front of her. There was a long table between them. Qin Chueshi gritted his teeth and said, "Huang Chonga, what did you say a few nights ago?" "Very good. I haven't forgotten what I said. Are you going to marry the princess?" Gu Shengyin paid no attention to his anger, unhurriedly pouring herself a cup of wine. "Your Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, we have seriously sought your opinion." She raised the wine cup in her hand and drained it in one gulp. "This one is the Crown Prince of Heavenly Phoenix, and it is my duty to help the royal family produce more offspring. Your Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, forget those words. You'll be returning to the great Qin Empire soon, and I'm afraid we won't see each other again in this lifetime." Her hand was tightly gripped by Qin Quebec. The other party's strength was great, as if he wanted to break her hand. "Forget," Qin K softly repeated, suddenly smiling. However, there was not the slightest trace of a smile in his eyes. "What does your Imperial Highness take this prince for? After teasing me, you want to dismiss this prince with a forget?" His long sleeves swept the items on the table to the ground, the cups falling to the ground with a crisp shattering sound. Qin K unquestionably kissed Gu Shengyin's lips. There was no doubt that this kiss contained intense emotions. Qin K bit her lips without any pity, as if he wanted to swallow her whole. Chapter 636. Gu Shengyin stared blankly for a moment before unceremoniously turning the tables. She wrapped her arms around Qin K's waist and pulled him towards her. Bai Xian had been standing guard outside the hall. When she heard the crisp sound of porcelain shattering, she was startled. However, without His Imperial Highness's summons, she didn't dare to casually enter. She could only quietly approach the door and listen. Not long after, she retreated with a red face. Thinking for a moment, she took 2 more steps outside, further away from the hall. By the time this intense kiss ended, the corners of their mouths were stained with blood. Gu Shengyin didn't care at all as she wiped it with her sleeve. Smiling, she said, "Your Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, is so passionate." Qin K stared at her closely. "Chang'e is not bad either." The two looked at each other for a second before Gu Shengyin took the lead to speak. "So, what does your Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, mean by coming here?" Qin K was speechless for a moment. What did he come here for? He had only heard the news that the Crown Prince was going to choose a successor. For a moment, he was enraged. However, what was he going to say after finding Chang'e? Tell her not to take a wife? Or was it as Chang'e had said that night? Was he willing to give up everything, come to the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty, and become her successor? Seeing him like this, Gu Shengyin understood that he hadn't thought things through. She sneered, "Your Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, since you still don't understand what you are thinking, then leave. This princess doesn't have that much time to waste with you." Qin K knew in his heart that she was forcing him to make a choice. However, he couldn't be sure. He didn't know if his feelings for this woman were worth giving up everything he once had. "Bai Xian!" Gu Shengyin shouted loudly. "See the guest out." Hearing the summons, Bai Xian walked in. Sensing the atmosphere in the hall, her heart jumped. Wasn't everything fine before? Why are they fighting now? Qin K looked at the woman who had turned her back to him. The heat from their embrace had not yet subsided, but his heart had already cooled. He turned around and walked out without saying a word. After he left, Gu Shengyin, who had been standing the whole time, sat down as if she had lost all her strength. Bai Xian looked at her red eyes and was shocked. "Your Highness." Gu Shengyin waved her hand. "It's fine. Clean up this place. I want to rest for a while." Bai Xian accepted the order and left. A few days later, the second election in the palace began. The Great Qin's diplomatic mission was scheduled to depart the next day. His Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, expressed to the Phoenix Emperor that he was extremely interested in how the Heavenly Phoenix chose its concubines and requested to watch. Knowing that there was something fishy going on between him and his eldest daughter, the Phoenix Emperor naturally agreed. Thus, on that day, the imperial concubine sat in the main seat. For the first time, Huang Chang'e personally appeared at the scene and sat on the first chair on the left. Qin K she sat opposite her. The young masters who were selected came forward one by one and bowed to the 3 of them. When they saw Gu Shengyin, the majority of the candidates blushed. Not only were the crown princes of noble status, but they were also incomparably beautiful. Gu Shengyin appeared indifferent throughout. On the other hand, Qin Kei's aura grew colder and colder as he looked at the elegant, flirtatious, and cold young masters. Since Gu Shengyin didn't show any special interest in anyone, he reluctantly endured. Until one person appeared. On the contrary, the assassins on the other side felt that something was wrong. They didn't have much time left. If the guards rushed over, they wouldn't have the chance to attack anymore. Thinking of the consequences of failing the mission, this group of people's attacks changed. They actually directly attacked without any regard for their lives. She would rather risk her own injury to leave a wound on Gu Shengyin's body. Enemies who weren't afraid of death were often the hardest to deal with. Glancing around, she saw that the guards had already arrived at the entrance of the main hall. Gu Shengyin breathed a sigh of relief. However, her eyes caught a glimpse of a scene that made her pupils shrink. "Be careful." Qin Kei, she only felt his body being hugged and turned around forcefully. Following that, he watched as the sharp tip of a snow-white blade pierced through Gu Shengyin's chest. Gu Shengyin's last thought before she fainted was, "System, remove the sense of pain." Qin Kei, she watched as she closed her eyes in his arms. His entire body was trembling. Chapter 638. The assassins had already been subdued by the Imperial Guards, but Qin Kei didn't pay any attention to them. He just gently touched the tip of Gu Shengyin's nose with a trembling hand, then suddenly turned around and shouted, "Imperial Physician!" At this time, the Imperial concubine also struggled to stand up and quickly walked to the front of the two people. Looking at his daughter who had been stabbed in the chest, he almost fainted. When the Phoenix Emperor heard the news and rushed over, the Imperial physician had just finished treating Gu Shengyin. "How is it?" the Phoenix Emperor hurriedly asked. Her heart was heavy. She had just seen Chonga's injury, and it was in such a position. "Sure enough," the Imperial physician replied with a grave expression, "replying to your Majesty, the Crown Prince was injured in a vital part. I'm afraid. It's very dangerous." Qin Kei's body swayed. The Imperial concubine looked at him with anger in his heart. "If it weren't for you, my Chonga wouldn't." "Feng Qing!" the Phoenix Emperor sternly shouted. "Chonga did it willingly. You can't blame others. If you really want to blame someone, you should put the blame on the mastermind behind this." Her eyes were full of murderous intent. No matter who it was, since they dared to have ideas about Chonga, they should be prepared to bear the consequences. Qin Kei suddenly smiled softly. His eyes were fixed on the unconscious Gu Shengyin, and he didn't give a shred of charity to others. "Imperial concubine, don't worry. If anything happens to Chonga, this prince will naturally go with her. I won't let her feel the slightest bit lonely." The Imperial concubine looked at this noble and proud man with a complicated gaze. From his reaction and Chonga's unhesitation to block the knife for him in the hall, how could he not know that there were feelings between the two? The Phoenix Emperor didn't say anything. She saw that Qin Kei's mood was obviously unstable, so she sighed and walked out with the Imperial concubine, leaving him alone. The palace servants were standing guard not far away, and no one dared to look in this direction. Qin Kei looked at this woman. He didn't expect that at such a moment, she would block a fatal knife for him without hesitation. "You win." He suddenly laughed. "If you can wake up this time, I will officially answer the question you asked me that night. If you really can't wake up, then I'll accompany you," he said softly. "I won't let you be alone." He gently leaned his head against her side. Gu Shengyin was in a coma for 7 days. Even the Imperial physicians were at their wits' end. The head of the hospital even apologized to the Phoenix Emperor, saying that he was powerless and that everything was up to fate. Qin Kei sat motionlessly by the bed for 7 days. Just by looking at his complexion, he didn't look any better than Gu Shengyin, who was lying on the bed. He stared numbly at the person on the bed as the Imperial physician spoke. "If His Highness doesn't wake up tonight, I really—" At this moment, Gu Shengyin regained consciousness. She saw Qin Kei's appearance, and a fine and dense pain spread in her heart. This man, at this moment, where was the slightest bit of his incomparably gorgeous appearance? His face was deathly pale, his eye sockets were sunken, and even his lips were cracked and bloodshot. "System, how badly did you make me?" The system answered honestly, "Host, you said that you must make yourself look like you're in danger, and it's best if you can't be saved. I strictly followed your instructions." Chapter 639. Gu Shengyin was speechless. Her system was indeed a straightforward one. That's right, she could have avoided the current situation. There was no need to mention who had sent the assassins that day. Just as they were about to hurt Qin Kei, she had already saved him. But at that time, she changed her mind and sent herself up instead. Firstly, she needed a chance to make Qin Kei see her heart clearly. Secondly, she needed a chance. Secondly, she wanted Huang Minge to be unable to make a comeback. There was nothing more important than herself as a bargaining chip. Anyway, she had already calculated the angle. She was sure that she only looked dangerous, but there was no real danger to her life. Only if she was dangerous enough would the Phoenix Emperor and Lord Feng hate the person behind the scenes. She had even specially instructed the system to make sure that she was safe and sound. But she didn't expect Qin Kei to have such a big reaction. Just one look and her heart ached. She wanted to open her eyes immediately and tell him that she was fine. The system stopped her. "Host, please don't fail at the last step." Gu Shengyin's heart calmed down a little and she listened to the system. Late at night, the entire clear Phoenix Palace was brightly lit. It wasn't just Qin Quebec. The Phoenix Emperor, Lord Feng, and a room full of imperial physicians and palace servants were also standing in the room. The imperial physicians said that if she didn't wake up tonight, it would probably be true. Everyone was watching over her, but the person on the bed looked calm. How did she look like she was about to wake up? Lord Feng couldn't hold back his tears anymore. As the ruler of a country, the Phoenix Emperor naturally couldn't cry. But looking at her red eyes and tightly pursed lips, one could imagine the pain and anticipation in her heart wasn't any less than Lord Feng's. In comparison, Qin Kei was much calmer. But underneath this calmness, there was more pain and despair than hysteria. The head of the imperial physicians came forward and carefully examined the crown prince on the bed. He shook his head and retreated to the side. Lord Feng finally couldn't hold back his tears. Time passed bit by bit. There was still no movement from the person on the bed. The first rays of dawn were about to appear. Everyone no longer had any hope. They were only here to accompany her for a little longer. "Water!" Amidst the silence, a weak call suddenly sounded. Qin Kei's reaction was delayed for a moment. He even suspected that his heart was filled with too much desire, to the point that he was hallucinating. The Phoenix Emperor was the first to react. She was overjoyed as she said, "Hurry up and bring some water over." After he finished speaking, he shouted to the side, "Imperial physician!" No one could tell that the Phoenix Emperor's calm voice was actually trembling slightly. Qin Kei turned her head sluggishly. Although the person on the bed was still weak, she had indeed opened her eyes. 7 days. The tears that he had not shed for 7 days finally fell at this moment. Gu Shengyin's heart ached for him, but she couldn't get up to hug him and tell him that she would never leave him. The imperial physician carefully examined Gu Shengyin's body. His expression was still filled with disbelief. Finally, she bowed to the Phoenix Emperor and said, "Your Majesty, this is great news. His Highness the Crown Prince has regained consciousness and is no longer in danger. What's left is to spend some time recuperating." Chapter 640. His Highness the Crown Prince, whom everyone thought to be incurable, had awoken. Many people breathed a sigh of relief when they heard this news. Most of the people who heaved sighs of relief were the palace servants who served in the palace, as well as some young and childless monarch attendants. These days, because of the assassination attempt on the Crown Prince, the atmosphere in the entire palace was incomparably tense. Everyone was very careful and did not dare to make the slightest mistake. They were afraid that if they were not careful, they would be punished by the furious His Majesty and Her Highness. Thankfully, His Highness the Crown Prince was safe. There was another group of people who pretended to be jubilant on the surface but secretly hated Huang Chang'e. Why was she so tenacious? These people were, of course, the concubines who had princesses or princesses of the same age as Huang Chang'e. They were the ones who hoped that Huang Chang'e wouldn't wake up. Of course, at this time, even if their hearts were bleeding with hatred, they still had to pretend to be blessed by the heavens. They went to the Phoenix Palace to report the good news to Her Majesty. They couldn't enter the clear Phoenix Palace. The Phoenix Emperor had ordered that no one was to disturb the Crown Prince before he recovered. Of course, Qin Kai wasn't included in this list. At this moment, he was being forced to rest by Gu Shengyin. If others come in and see you like this, they won't know who's injured. Gu Shengyin said with a smile. Qin Kai only looked at her without speaking. Gu Shengyin sighed inwardly. She had really scared him this time. She softened her voice. I'm fine now. Kai, don't worry. Why? Qin Kai asked. He hadn't spoken for many days. When he spoke, his voice was extremely hoarse. Gu Shengyin didn't know what he was asking. Why did you block that blade for me? Gu Shengyin smiled. If something happened to His Highness, the Prince of Yong, in Heavenly Phoenix, it wouldn't be a small matter. Qin Kai interrupted her. I want to hear the truth. Gu Shengyin stopped smiling. Okay, then I'll tell you the truth. Kai, do you really not know? She had never hidden her thoughts from Qin Kai Shi. Gu Shengyin suddenly laughed. When I was unconscious, I vaguely heard someone say that as long as I could wake up, he would officially answer my question that night. Qin Kai's eyes widened as if he hadn't expected her to be conscious at that time. Gu Shengyin said softly, I know what you've been doing these days. You've worked hard. Qin Kai laughed. Do you want to know the answer? Gu Shengyin pretended to listen attentively. Qin Kai said word by word, Chang'e, I only have one condition. If you want me, then you have to agree. In this life, there is only me, Qin Kai Shi. Similarly, Qin Kai Shi can also swear that in this lifetime, he will only love you, Huang Chang'e. Gu Shengyin smiled, her eyes shining brightly. Kai Shi, if it wasn't for the fact that it's inconvenient for me to do this, I'd really want to pin you down. Qin Kai Shi glared fiercely at her. Let's see who will press who down. In Clear Phoenix Palace, the two were sweet and sweet. In Heavenly Phoenix Palace, Huang Minge knelt on the cold ground, enduring the fury of the Phoenix Emperor. Minge, you really disappoint us. The Phoenix Emperor looked at his daughter, only disgust in his eyes. Chapter 641. Do you really think that no one knows what you did before? Chang'e has defended you in front of me time and time again. I didn't pursue the matter because of Chang'e. I always thought that you are sisters and that you will repent one day. The Phoenix Emperor seemed to be angry. She flicked her sleeves and threw the teacup on the table. The hot tea splashed on Huang Minge's body and she couldn't help but shudder. But immediately, a wave of resentment rose from her heart. She probably knew that she really didn't have a chance this time. Even if she wasn't sentenced to death, she wouldn't have a good ending. For Chang'e's sake, Mother Empress, you keep talking about Chang'e. Have you ever considered the feelings of our other daughters? Huang Minge threw caution to the wind. The words that she only dared to hide in her heart in the past were now spilled out. Am I the only one who hates her? If you don't believe me, you can ask the other sisters. Who doesn't hate Huang Chang'e in their hearts? We are all your daughters, but in your heart, all of us added together can't even compare to a single strand of Huang Chang'e's hair. The Phoenix Emperor looked at her in disbelief, as if it was the first time she knew this daughter. So, this is the reason why you keep on framing Chang'e? Huang Minge didn't reply, which meant that she admitted it. The Phoenix Emperor trembled with anger. How did I give birth to such a cruel and vicious thing like you? She turned around and didn't look at Huang Minga anymore. Come, pass the imperial edict. The 8th princess, Huang Minga, has no respect for her superiors. She is disloyal and unfilial. She is demoted to a commoner and imprisoned in the imperial mausoleum. She can never be released. Huang Minga collapsed. Imprisoned in the imperial mausoleum, never to be released. It would be better to just kill her directly. The imperial edict of the Heavenly Phoenix Palace was passed to the inviting Phoenix Palace. The Phoenix Emperor closed his eyes when he heard the news. Your Highness, do you want to persuade His Majesty? A place like the imperial mausoleum. The Phoenix Emperor opened his eyes and looked at her coldly. Persuade His Majesty? How? Chang'e is still lying there now. She hired someone to assassinate the Crown Prince. This evil creature, His Majesty is already benevolent enough not to kill her directly. Of course, he felt terrible. After all, she was a child that he carried for 10 months. But she really let him down. The Phoenix Emperor acted quickly. On the second day after the decree was issued, Huang Minga left Phoenix City under the escort of hundreds of imperial guards. It was said that back then, Huang Minga had knelt in front of the inviting Phoenix Palace for several hours, but the Lord Concubine didn't even see her once. Gu Shengyi knew that in this lifetime, unless there was a special decree from the emperor, Huang Minga would never have the chance to take a step out of that desolate land. Great Qin's diplomatic group stayed in Heavenly Phoenix for an entire month. The reason was naturally because a certain crown prince was injured and needed someone to take care of him. As for why the crown prince had so many palace attendants to attend to him, and why he only needed His Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, the Great Qin's envoys expressed their heartache. Their Great Qin dynasty's most beautiful and noble Imperial Highness, the Prince of Yong, probably wouldn't be able to remain in the Great Qin dynasty for much longer. In the 11th month, Great Qin's ambassadors officially returned. Gu Shengyi, who had not fully recovered from her injuries, insisted on escorting them out of the city. Because of her injuries, she didn't ride a horse. When she got off the carriage, she even put on a thick fur cloak. Kei-shi, wait for me. I will personally go to Great Qin with a huge gift and ask for His Majesty's hand in marriage. Gu Shengyi held his hand. The Great Qin's envoys all expressed that they didn't see or hear anything. All right. Chapter 642. In the 3rd month of the 11th year of the Phoenix era of the Heavenly Phoenix dynasty, the Crown Prince, Feng Chang'e, personally set off for the Great Qin to seek the hand of His Highness, the Prince of Yong. In the 8th month of the 11th year of the Phoenix era, the Crown Prince held a grand wedding in the clear Phoenix Palace. Not only the Phoenix Emperor and the Phoenix Monarch, but even the common people of Heavenly Phoenix dynasty heaved a sigh of relief. The Crown Prince was no longer young. He was finally getting married. After the complicated ceremony, the newlyweds, who had received countless blessings, finally arrived at the bedchamber. The palace maids had already tidied up everything and left the place to the two of them after finishing their preparations. Kei-shi. Gu Shengyi smiled with satisfaction. You finally belong to me. Qin Kai raised his long eyebrows. His beautiful appearance, set off by his red robes, was even more unparalleled. You also belong to me, Chang'e. The hall gradually quieted down. Bai Xian. Lan Xian, another palace servant who stood with Bai Xian on night watch, whispered, Tell me, who do you think is between His Highness and the Crown Prince? She stealthily pointed up with her finger. She couldn't be blamed. It really made people curious. Bai Xian glared at her unhappily. Be careful. If His Highness hears you, he will punish you tomorrow. But soon after, she couldn't help but laugh. It should be His Highness? However, this question became a mystery in everyone's heart. The next morning, when Bai Xian and Lan Xian entered the hall to serve the two princes, both of them looked calm and energetic. There was no sign of anything going on. Gu Shengyi and Qin Kai went to visit the Phoenix Emperor and the Phoenix Monarch respectively. Both of them were very satisfied with Qin Kai. After all, when Chang'e was injured, this child showed deep affection. It was truly moving. After a long time, Everyone said that His Highness and the Crown Prince were simply a match made in heaven. The relationship between the two was so good that there was no room for outsiders. The only fly in the ointment was that Zheng Jun's stomach still showed no signs of pregnancy even after half a year of marriage. Even the Phoenix monarch couldn't help but glance at Qin Kai Shi's stomach when he paid his respects. The women of the heavenly Phoenix dynasty didn't have the ability to conceive. After marriage, if the men wanted to have children, they would eat a fruit called the spirit-bearing fruit. After eating it, their bodies would have the ability to conceive. However, it was only the ability to conceive. It didn't mean that the heavenly Phoenix dynasty's imperial harem would be pregnant immediately. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many childless emperors' imperial concubines. The imperial concubine couldn't be blamed for being anxious. Gu Shengyin only had Qin Kai Shi as his lord. Everyone could see that the relationship between the two of them was very good. It was really strange that she wasn't pregnant. In the imperial court, there were already ministers who proposed to take in a secondary emperor for the crown prince, but they were all firmly rejected by Gu Shengyin. Only Bai Xin and Lan Xin, who served the two of them, knew the truth. His Highness didn't take the spirit-pregnant fruit at all. Princess, 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 royal highnesses, princesses, princess. Fruit, 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 royal highness, princess, princess, highness, princess, highness. Princess. Qin's princess of marriage, princess of. But no matter how hard she tried to hide it, Qin Kai Shi would find out one day. That night, Qin Kai Shi sat quietly on the bed and looked at her. Why didn't you let me eat those fruits? Gu Shengyin paused. Marrying me has already made you suffer. He was such a proud person. For her, he gave up his noble status and his family to come to this isolated heavenly phoenix. How could she bear to let a man of the great Qin Empire suffer such a thing? Chapter 643. She didn't finish her sentence, but Qin Kai Shi understood what she meant. He didn't say anything else. He just grabbed her hand, locked her in his embrace, and gently kissed her. In the 4th month of the 12th year of the Phoenix origin, Crown Prince Zhang Jun suddenly felt nauseous while eating. After calling for an imperial physician, he was overjoyed. The two palaces were overjoyed and endlessly rewarded Clear Phoenix Palace. Gu Shengyin only felt frightened. After everyone left, she looked at Qin Kai Shi, who had been properly placed on the bed. You don't have to do this for me. Qin Kai Shi smiled. When I agreed to marry into Heavenly Phoenix Palace, I was already prepared for this. She didn't want him to feel wronged, but how could he bear to see her endure pressure from all sides for him? A crown prince without an heir, no matter how much the Phoenix Emperor doted on her, he wouldn't be able to tolerate her, right? Gu Shengyin only felt a warm current surging in her heart. She gently leaned her head against Qin Kai Shi's chest and said, I, Huang Changge, am so lucky to be able to marry you. Qin Kai Shi reached out and held her hand, a warm smile on his face. How could he, Qin Kai Shi, not be lucky? In the 10th month of the 12th year of the Phoenix origin, Crown Prince Zhang Jun gave birth to a pair of twins, a boy and a girl, in Clear Phoenix Palace. Gu Shengyin only glanced at the two little children before sitting down beside Qin Kai Shi. She lowered her head and leaned close to his face, softly saying, Let's raise these two children well and not have any more children, okay? Qin Kai Shi smiled and nodded. The phoenix soaring and the dragon soaring were auspicious signs. No one could criticize Clear Phoenix Palace anymore. Those righteous voices that wanted to choose a concubine for the crown prince also gradually weakened. Everyone knew that the crown prince was deeply in love with Crown Prince Zhang Jun. Even looking at the situation, it seemed that he was going to stop taking in a harem for him. Many people disapproved of this. In their opinion, the crown prince hadn't been married for long. It was the time for the young couple to be affectionate. In addition, Crown Prince Zhang Jun was born with a heavenly appearance. It was common sense that the crown prince was very important. But women always liked the new and hated the old. No matter how beautiful the face was, there would be a time when it would age. When that time came, how could the crown prince who sat on the throne of the world still be able to hold on? However, Gu Shengyin used facts to tell them what it meant to be the only one in a lifetime. The Phoenix Emperor was in his prime. As the crown prince, Gu Shengyin did not feel much pressure. She even had time to bring Qin Kai Shi and the 2 children out of the palace to play in disguise. Every time the nobles of Heavenly Phoenix saw the crown prince, they could see that she and His Royal Highness were in love with each other. The 2 of them were the envy of others. Another 10 years passed. The Phoenix Emperor officially passed the throne to Gu Shengyin and retired to the depths of the palace to enjoy the rest of his life. Gu Shengyin officially inherited the throne of the Phoenix Emperor and changed the name of the country to Fengyong. Using Qin Kai Shi's previous title as the country's title showed that she valued him greatly. On the first day of the new Phoenix Emperor's ascension to the throne, he said something in front of all the officials. "In this lifetime, we will only love His Royal Highness. Everyone, in the future, do not mention the matter of the imperial harem." When these words came out, the court was shocked. Many of the old officials knelt and begged His Majesty to retract the decree. Gu Shengyin hated these officials who took advantage of their seniority the most. They relied on their seniority to think that it would be difficult for the new emperor to deal with them. However, Gu Shengyin did not fall for this trick. After he thunderously sent the old officials home to retire, no one raised any more objections. The Phoenix Emperor and Her Royal Highness only had 1 son and 1 daughter. Just as the Phoenix Emperor said on the day of her ascension, she would only have Her Royal Highness in the imperial harem. Later, there were rumors that the 2 of them only had a pair of children because the Phoenix Emperor pitied Her Royal Highness and did not want him to suffer the pain of childbirth. But as for what the truth was, everyone could only speculate from a few records. Chapter 644. Once upon a time, there was an immortal herb that was accidentally dropped into the mortal world by a fairy during a banquet held by the heavenly court. This was an extremely rare immortal herb that was plucked from the Panglai Immortal Island in the depths of the South Sea. The fairy didn't dare to speak of it for fear of being punished, so she concealed it. That immortal herb fell into the garden of a wealthy family. It wasn't conspicuous among the precious flowers, and it stayed there peacefully for more than 10 years. Until one day, it bloomed. When Gu Shengyin came to this world, she just happened to see this immortal herb bloom. After all, it wasn't an ordinary plant. When it bloomed, it didn't simply bloom, but it transformed. On the long leaves, a white flower slowly bloomed. The bud was very small, but when it unfolded, it seemed as if an endless number of petals were released. The flowers in the garden bent towards her at the same time, and the entire garden was filled with a strange fragrance. This flower fragrance wasn't ordinary. It carried the scent of an immortal. If an ordinary person smelled it, even if they didn't get sick or have no disasters, it wouldn't be a problem for them to prolong their life. Then, that white flower gently trembled twice. A white light flashed, and the flowers and leaves instantly turned into dots of fluorescent light. Within the dots of light, a graceful figure in white gradually took shape. Her white clothes were made of an unknown material, and it was extremely elegant and beautiful. Her sleeves and skirt were full of blooming petals, elegant and lovely. Her hair wasn't tied up, and there was only a white flower crown woven from the top of her head. Under the flower crown was an astonishingly beautiful face. This was a woman who had transformed from words. The moment Gu Shengyin opened her eyes, she looked in a certain direction. Beside the pillar in the garden pavilion, a man in a black robe stood quietly. His face was handsome, and his black eyes were as sharp as an eagle's, staring closely at her. There was an aura as heavy as a mountain on his body. This was something that could only be emitted by someone who had been in a high position for many years. It was very obvious that the scene of her transformation had been seen by this person. "Who are you? I don't think I've seen you before." Gu Shengyin tilted her head to look at the man. The man walked over step by step. He came to Gu Shengyin's side. The strong fragrance from before had already dissipated, but when one walked close to the woman, they could still smell the fragrance. "Oh, what kind of people do you usually see?" he asked with interest. Gu Shengyin frowned as if she was thinking carefully. "There are Cui, Elon, Chong Shang, Master Yun, Madam Yun, Miss Yun. Yuan Rui thought for a moment. Among these people, he only knew a few names. The others sounded like slaves. He was not interested in these things. Who are you? Why are you here? Gu Shengyin seemed surprised by his question. I live here. I have lived here for more than 10 years. I'm Yulan. Live here? Yuan Rui glanced at the flower bed and understood what she meant. It seemed that she really treated these 2 pieces of soil as her home. For some reason, Yuan Rui suddenly wanted to laugh, but he held back. He turned his head and asked, Are you willing to go with me? Gu Shengyin was not so easy to fool. Why should I go with you? Yuan Rui scared her. You should know that the people here are different from you. If they know that you are a flower, they will kill you. Chapter 645. What surprised him was that this girl, who looked like a flower fairy or a flower spirit, was not easy to fool at all. Gu Shengyin smiled slyly. If I turn into a flower, none of them will know. The man guided her patiently. Don't you want to take a look at the outside world? Gu Shengyin's eyes widened. She had heard Cui and the others mention that the outside of the Yun residence was fun. Seeing the longing in her eyes, Yuan Rui chuckled softly, his eyes filled with determination. If you come with me, I can take you everywhere to play. As a flower, the biggest disadvantage was that she had always been rooted in the soil. Before she transformed, she had never gone anywhere. Gu Shengyin, who was tempted, nodded dizzily. At this moment, someone entered the garden. His Highness Xian King. Her voice came to an abrupt halt when she saw Gu Shengyin. Gu Shengyin looked at her. She recognized this person. This was the eldest miss of the Yun residence, Yun Chuqing, the #1 beauty of the Ming Kingdom. However, this #1 beauty might be discounted now because of the addition of Gu Shengyin. If Yun Chuqing was a beauty in exquisite brocade clothes, then Gu Shengyin was the uncanny workmanship of nature. She was naturally exquisite, like the moonlight on the horizon, like an orchid in an empty valley. Yun Chuqing's expression was not good. It was not easy for her father to have the opportunity to invite His Highness Sage King into the estate, and he had long instructed her to perform well. If she could gain His Highness Sage King's favor, it would be a good thing for the entire Yun estate. Yun Chuqing was originally very confident. This His Highness Xian King had not taken a wife or concubines, and with her beauty, it should not be a problem to win him over. She had specially dressed up to come here. However, she was not so confident now. This was because there was clearly a beauty beside His Highness Xian King who was not inferior to her, and was even more beautiful than her. She squeezed out a smile. May I know who this young lady is? I didn't see you just now. However, she thought in her heart, she's definitely not a daughter of a good family if she's dressed like that. Gu Shengyin, who had a smile on her face, suddenly became angry and turned around to ignore her. Yuan Rui didn't know why she was angry. He held her back with one hand and nodded at Yun Chuqing. These people are from the prince's estate. They came here to look for this prince. He glanced at Yun Chuqing. How could he not know what she was planning? Yun Chuqing was indeed beautiful, but he now had an even better treasure. He said, It's getting late. I'll take my leave. Yun Chuqing watched helplessly as the Sage King pulled her away. When they left the residence of Yun, there was already a carriage from the imperial residence waiting outside. Although the people outside were very curious as to why the prince had brought back such an outstanding beauty, they tactfully did not dare to ask any questions. What's wrong with you? Yuan Rui asked curiously. Gu Shengyin looked at him angrily. She scolded me. Yuan Rui thought for a moment before realizing that she was talking about Yun Chuqing. How did she scold you? He was very curious. The two clearly did not communicate at all. Gu Shengyin stretched out her hand and pointed at his chest. She said it here. Yuan Rui's expression suddenly became serious. She can actually hear the thoughts in other people's hearts? Then can you hear what I'm saying? He asked. Gu Shengyin shook her head honestly. You're very strange. You're the first person I can't hear. Chapter 646. Gu Shengyin sat in the room and slowly sorted out the plot of this world. Originally, Yulan had also transformed in the back garden of the Yun residence on this day. However, she did not meet Yuan Rue. Yulan, who had mysteriously appeared in the garden of the Yun residence, naturally aroused the vigilance of the people of the Yun residence. Yulan, who was naive and did not know how to win people's hearts, immediately exposed her secret. When she heard that the people of the Yun residence wanted to catch her, she ran away in fear. However, the people of the Yun residence were afraid and went to invite a Taoist priest who came out of nowhere and chased her all over the city. Yulan, who had just transformed and did not know anything, was caught and the weak immortal qi in her body was sealed. She was brought back to the Yun residence. The person who was most hostile to her in the Yun residence was actually the eldest daughter of the Yun residence, Yun Chuqing, because she was jealous that Yulan was prettier than her. She personally scratched Yulan's face and sold her to the brothel. After living a life worse than death in the brothel, Yulan finally took advantage of an opportunity to learn the escape route from the guard's heart and successfully escaped. For the next 10 years, she lived in seclusion deep in the mountains and relied on the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to cultivate. Unfortunately, Yulan, whose heart had been corroded by hatred and resentment, had already fallen into the demonic path. She appeared in the Yun residence and killed all 87 lives of the Yun residence. Yun Chuqing, who had already married into a noble family, was naturally not spared. Yulan had killed her 2 children right in front of her and ended her life. Yulan, who had committed such a crime, was unable to escape the majesty of the heavenly Tao during her 100-year tribulation and disappeared. In fact, Yulan was originally a cold moon orchid that was hard to come by in 10,000 years in the Panglai immortal Tao. If she had been absorbing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth on Panglai Island, she would have been an exalted immortal after transforming. Even in the heavenly court, she would have been one of the best among the flower immortals after transforming. However, she had encountered such a thing. Therefore, after she died, Gu Shengyin came to her body before everything had happened. However, it seemed that His Highness Sage King's purpose in bringing her along was not simple. Gu Shengyin had no way of probing into his mind, but she had an extremely sensitive perception. Unlike the lovers in the previous world, Gu Shengyin could see the appreciation in his eyes, but in the deepest part of his eyes, there was a thick coldness that could not be melted. Perhaps it was because he knew that Gu Shengyin had a special ability, but Yuan Rue never let random people get close to her. He even accompanied Gu Shengyin for her daily meals. To the outside world, the Sage King's explanation was that his junior sister had come out of the Carefree Valley to play with him. Everyone knew that His Royal Highness Sage King had once been apprenticed to the mysterious Carefree Valley. The people of Carefree Valley were eccentric, so no one doubted his words. Gu Shengyin also played dumb with him, dutifully playing the role of a qualified flower fairy who knew nothing about the world, waiting for him to reveal his purpose. In fact, everyone in the Sage King's mansion was very interested in Gu Shengyin, the legendary disciple of Carefree Valley, but they had never had the chance to meet her. Yuan Rue did have his own purpose. He was good to this little flower fairy with a strange origin, just for his own selfish desires. But he didn't know that after doing too much fake acting, it would become real. After a long time of hypocrisy, perhaps sometimes he himself couldn't tell whether this hypocrisy was real or not. Chapter 647. Your Highness, Miss Yulan's talent is rarely seen in my life. A dignified madam said to Yuan Rue in pleasant surprise. She was the zither master that Yuan Rue had invited for Gu Shengyin. Yulan was born with an immortal wood body, transparent and flawless. She could understand things like zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting with just a little bit. Every teacher that Yuan Rue had invited was full of praise for her. After sending off the female teacher, Yuan Rue walked into the courtyard. The woman, still dressed in white and wearing a flower crown, was sitting there elegantly playing the zither. Her fingers were skillful, and waves of distant and moving music flowed from her fingertips. When she played to her heart's content, she even closed her eyes and gently raised a smile, as if she was immersed in it and enjoying it. Yu Wenrui was unconsciously stunned. This kind of woman, this kind of woman. He came back to his senses and remembered his purpose. He remembered his years of forbearance and revenge. His eyes instantly became cold. Yu Lan. He called out to her gently, his eyes filled with tenderness. The zither music stopped. Gu Shengyin happily opened her eyes and looked at him. You came. Her mind was as pure as a child's. Her thoughts were completely revealed on her face. However, this expression made Yu Wenrui's eyes darken. Didn't you always want to go out and play? I'll take you out to play today, okay? He asked softly. Gu Shengyin instantly widened her eyes. Really? She had been in the Sage King Manor for many days, but Yu Wenrui never let her go out. He said that there were too many bad people outside and he didn't have time. It was not safe to take her out. Seeing her like this, Yu Wenrui unconsciously revealed a smile. Really? When the prince wanted to go out, the servants of the manor naturally quickly prepared the things. Gu Shengyin was asked to change her clothes. According to Yu Wenrui, the clothes she was wearing looked too unusual. If she went out, she had to be careful. Gu Shengyin naturally wouldn't be tangled up in this kind of small matter. For many people in the manor, this was the first time they saw the little junior sister that the prince spoke of. What a beautiful lady! I'm afraid that even the #1 beauty in the Ming Kingdom can't compare to her. His Highness has yet to marry and is so good to this junior sister. Could she be our future princess consort? Gu Shengyin listened to their voices one by one. When they entered the carriage, she suddenly asked, "What is a princess?" Yu Wenrui was stunned. Why are you suddenly asking about this? Gu Shengyin blinked. I just heard it. Yu Wenrui recalled her unfathomable ability and understood. He explained, Wang Fei is His Highness's wife. My wife is Xian Wang Fei. Gu Shengyin softly repeated the word, wife. Suddenly, her face turned slightly red. I know what the books say. A wife is someone who will spend the rest of her life with you and will never be separated, right? Yu Wenrui nodded. Then can I be your wife? Yu Wenrui looked up in surprise and saw this little flower fairy looking at him with expectation. Her face was red and her eyes seemed to be hiding a pool of water. He was moved for a moment, but then he remembered his own situation. He hardened his heart and only smiled softly. You don't understand at all. There are too many things needed between husband and wife. Although Gu Shengyin didn't understand those twists and turns, she could tell that Yu Wenrui didn't promise her. She suddenly became depressed. Chapter 648. Fortunately, her mood left as quickly as it came. Not long after, when she saw the bustling crowd outside, the lively and novel scene immediately attracted her attention. Yu Wenrui ordered someone to stop the carriage, and the two got off in the downtown area. Gu Shengyin was like a child, looking here and there. From time to time, she would take something she was interested in and leave, not knowing how to pay. Yu Wenrui resigned himself to his fate and followed behind her as a money bag. She was delicate and beautiful, and her clothes were gorgeous. Those peddlers knew that she was most likely a noble, so they bragged about their things, fooling her with a few words. This is so sweet, do you want to try? Gu Shengyin put a bite of sugar-coated haw in front of Yu Wenrui's mouth. Try it. Yu Wenrui looked at the sugar-coated haw and felt a bit strange. No one had ever treated him like this. No one would, and no one would dare to give their food to His Highness the Sage King. But looking at Gu Shengyin's pure and happy expectation, he was shaken for a moment, but he still obediently lowered his head and took a bite of the sugar-coated haw. A strong sour taste spread from the tip of his tongue. Ha 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 ha, I lied to you, it's so sour. Gu Shengyin laughed like a kitten that had stolen a fish. Yu Wenrui helplessly looked at her, but he was reluctant to spit out the sugar-coated haw. He didn't feel sour, it was very sweet. The two separated at noon. Gu Shangyin seemed to have endless energy, and she didn't have the slightest intention to rest. Soon, it was night. The Ming Kingdom's capital was lit up everywhere. Many of the peddlers packed up and went home. More snacks and fun things appeared on the street. The night market came out. Gu Shengyin couldn't stop playing. Until Yuan Rui called her, "It's late, I'll take you to see something, then we'll go home." "What is it?" Gu Shengyin's attention was immediately attracted. Yuan Rui smiled, "Let's go, I'll take you to a place." The place he was referring to was the high platform of a restaurant in the city. "There's nothing fun here." Gu Shengyin looked around. There were only a few chairs and a small table. There were not even a few stars to be seen tonight. Yuan Rui smiled. "Raise your head." Gu Shengyin followed his words and looked up. There was a deafening sound. She was shocked at first, but soon, she was attracted by the thing that appeared in front of her. Large and gorgeous fireworks bloomed in front of her eyes, falling from the sky with long and beautiful tails. Gu Shengyin stood at a high position, and some of the little tails even fell beside her. She was so happy that she wanted to use her hands to catch them, but she found that when those beautiful little things fell into her hands, they were just a bunch of dust that would be blown away by the wind. But there were even more beautiful fireworks in the air. "It's so beautiful." She turned her head and smiled at Yuan Rui, who was standing behind her. Yuan Rui looked at the woman in front of him in a daze. She had a face like a flower, slim and elegant. Behind her, there were brilliant fireworks. This kind of scene, this kind of person, he thought, I'll never forget it for the rest of my life. At this time, Gu Shengyin suddenly walked towards him. Then, she gently kissed him on the cheek. "I read in a book that humans use this to show their love." Chapter 649. Yuan Rui, I like you, she said. Yuan Rui couldn't hold back and tightly hugged the person in his arms. The two people, under the backdrop of the fireworks, hugged each other. It was the most romantic thing. But Yuan Rui's words were not romantic at all. "Don't like me, Yulan." After a long time, he said. Gu Shengyin had been playing for the whole day and was a little tired. At this moment, she was about to fall asleep. When she heard him speak, she only responded in a daze. Seeing her like this, the worry that had just risen in Yuan Rui's heart immediately disappeared. He helplessly revealed a smile, picked her up by the waist, and returned to the Wong Fu. Starting from that night, some things seemed to have changed. Yuan Rui appeared more and more in Gu Shengyin's courtyard. Gu Shengyin was no longer like before to amuse herself. When she was alone, she would look forward to Yuan Rui's arrival. When she saw him, she would be overjoyed. She would talk to him about the songs she liked, and hope that he would stay with her all day. Yuan Rui felt like he was crazy. He shouldn't be like this. He knew very well what his goal was in bringing this woman to the Wong Fu. But his heart was moved. "Your Highness, don't forget what our goal is," his confidant advised him. These people all knew of Gu Shengyin's existence, but they had never seen her before. Because of her ability, Yuan Rui didn't dare let them see her. Yes, he had more important things to do. Yuan Rui thought of that person's flower-like smile and fiercely closed his eyes. Gu Shengyin hadn't seen Yuan Rui for 3 days. On this day, when a servant girl of the Wong Fu was preparing food for her, she asked, "Why hasn't Yuan Rui come?" In the entire Wong Fu, only she dared to call him this. The servant girl had become familiar with her these days and was very fond of this junior sister of His Highness. She smiled and said, "Miss, Our Highness is about to take a secondary fei. He's a bit busy right now." Take in a secondary consort? Gu Shengyin was stunned for a moment. She didn't understand what he meant. However, the maidservant left after laying out the dishes for her. His Highness had said that this Miss Yulan did not like crowds, so they were not allowed to disturb her. After the maid left, Gu Shengyin lazily replied, "System, help me check." She had played dumb with Yuan Rui for so long. It was time to look at the script. The system told her everything. Even though Gu Shengyin had made some guesses from Yuan Rui's words and actions these days, when she really knew the truth, she couldn't help but sigh. The lovers in this world are really scum. If she really was Yulan, she would probably have to enter the demonic Tao again after encountering such a person. Gu Shengyin was used to having a lover who loved her wholeheartedly and obeyed her every wish in every world. Suddenly meeting such a lover, the feeling in her heart was really very subtle. However, subtle was subtle. Gu Shengyin expressed, she was angry. Since she was angry, if she didn't ruthlessly torture a certain person, there was no way to make her happy. Yuan Rui, who was talking with his trusted aide, suddenly felt his body turn cold. A bad feeling spread in his heart. What was going on? He was confused, but didn't care. Chapter 650. Half a month passed and Yuan Rui forced himself not to go to that small courtyard. Today, he couldn't take it anymore. Before he entered the courtyard, he heard the sound of a zither. It was different from the leisure and joy of the past. This zither sound was filled with a faint sense of worry. Yuan Rui's heart tightened. She too, would she have any worries? He couldn't help but quicken his steps and see the person in the courtyard. She was still wearing that pure white robe, but in Yuan Rui's eyes, that person seemed to have lost a lot of weight. There was a slight sourness spreading in his heart. Gu Shengyin noticed him. You're here. Her eyes were filled with joy as she quickly ran in front of Yuan Rui. I'm going to take a secondary concubine. This was the first thing Yuan Rui said to her. Gu Shengyin's smile froze on her face. After transforming for so long, Yuan Rui had invited many famous female teachers to teach her. She knew everything she needed to know. For example, what did it mean to take a secondary concubine? She cried. Yuan Rui was a bit flustered. He had thought about how she would react, but he didn't expect her to cry out like this. It wasn't a loud cry. Her tears rolled out without any warning, as if they wouldn't stop flowing. Don't you like me? Gu Shengyin asked. Yuan Rui was speechless. How could he not like her? He liked her so much that he wanted to change his initial thoughts and keep her by his side. But he couldn't. He had prepared for this for so long. He couldn't let go of his long-cherished wish. Since he couldn't let go, then the one to be let go could only be Gu Shengyin. His voice was a bit hoarse. Yulan, I will have a secondary concubine in the future. I will have a primary concubine. This has nothing to do with liking. The flower fairy's mind clearly couldn't understand this. She only knew that being with the person she liked was the happiest thing. There was nothing better. But humans were different. In their hearts, there were too many things more important than this. The two parted on bad terms. Yuan Rui left in a sorry state. He felt very despicable. He had never thought of himself as a good person, but this was the first time his heart ached for hurting someone because of his despicable actions. But in the future, he would do even more despicable things. The things sent to the small courtyard were still the most precious things in the mansion, but Yuan Rui rarely came back. One day, an uninvited guest came to Gu Shengyin's courtyard. Gu Shengyin recognized her. She was the #1 beauty of the Ming Kingdom, Yun Chuqing, who would also be the Xian King's concubine. She knew why Yuan Rui wanted to take her as his concubine. The Yun family was the wealthiest in the world. Although their status as merchants wasn't high, their wealth was comparable to the national treasury. Behind Yun Chuqing was a large group of attendants. She arrogantly said to Gu Shengyin, I'm here to meet the little junior sister that our prince has hidden in this courtyard. Her tone was full of disdain, as if she wasn't talking about her junior sister, but a shameful mistress. The attendants behind her also sneered. Gu Shengyin looked at this woman coldly. Who are you? Her tone was flat when she spoke. She was just sitting there leisurely, but Yun Chuqing felt that she was showing off to her. A maid beside her said, Our family's young miss is the Yun family's eldest miss, the Xian King's future secondary concubine. Oh. Future secondary concubine. Gu Shengyin emphasized these words. She was not surprised to see Yun Chuqing's face turn green. If you want to put on airs, enter the mansion first. Come back after you become the primary concubine. Chapter 651. Yun Chuqing was so angry by Gu Shengyin's words that she was speechless. In her eyes, this girl was mocking her, saying that she was only a secondary consort and had no right to lecture her. The maid beside her stood up and sneered. There is no official consort in the virtuous king mansion. When our secondary consort marries in the future, she will be the only female master in the mansion. Miss, you should be careful with your words. Gu Shengyin's eyes did not even move as she continued to play the zither in her hands. Yuan Rui's figure appeared at the entrance of the courtyard. What are you doing here? His words were directed at Yun Chuqing. When Yun Chuqing saw him, her expression changed. She said sadly, Your Highness, I just heard that your junior sister is living in the courtyard and wanted to meet her. I didn't expect that this miss doesn't seem to welcome me. You want to use your power to oppress me and humiliate me, Gu Shengyin finished her sentence. Yun Chuqing's expression changed. She did have such thoughts, but she couldn't admit it no matter what. Yuan Rui knew why Gu Shengyin said that. Her unique ability allowed her to know what everyone was thinking. He glanced at Yun Chuqing, his gaze full of disgust. This woman, if it weren't for her family's wealth. Miss Yun, it's better not to trouble you with the matters of the virtuous king mansion for the time being. Yun Chuqing's face turned pale. What did this mean? Was he trying to humiliate her in front of everyone? Wasn't she his future secondary consort? However, she did not dare to say anything and left with her people with a pale face. After Yun Chuqing left, Yuan Rui said to Gu Shengyin apologetically, I was thoughtless and let others disturb you. Gu Shengyin shook her head. You have nothing to be sorry about. I'm troubling you by staying here. Yuan Rui listened to her cold voice, which was different from before, and a bad feeling arose in his heart. Gu Shengyin continued, I've been staying here for so long. When I transformed that day, you also benefited a lot. Let's call it even. I'm preparing to leave. Leave. Yuan Rui couldn't tell how he felt when he heard those words. It was a little painful, but also a little empty. Don't you like me? Why are you leaving now? He heard himself ask with a sneer. Gu Shengyin looked at him strangely. Her eyes were still as clear and bright as when they first met. You don't like me anymore. Why should I like you? Her thinking was so simple. You like me, I like you. Yuan Rui suddenly laughed in a low voice. This person looked so naive, but in reality, he was the most heartless one. He closed his eyes and laughed at himself in his heart. This is good too. At least this way, when I make that decision, I won't be too heartbroken. His heart had already wavered, but he realized that he had fallen for her. He couldn't bear to part with her. He hadn't come to see her for half a month because he wanted to see if he could really give up on her. When he heard that Yun Chuqing had brought a large group of people to this small courtyard, he immediately rushed over. But what he saw was a completely different Yulan. This was good too. He comforted himself. There shouldn't be any more fetters between the two of them in the first place. Help me with one last thing, he heard himself say indifferently. Chapter 652. The sound of the zither suddenly stopped. The small courtyard suddenly quieted down. The two sat in silence. Gu Shengyin asked after a long time, What is it? Yuan Rui opened his mouth. He felt that he could say it without any hindrance. This was the reason why he had brought her out of the Yun manor. But the girl in front of him sat in silence. A pair of clear and flawless eyes stared at him, making him feel that his mind was dirty. In the end, he couldn't open his mouth. Almost in a sorry state, he said, I haven't thought it through yet. When I think it through, I'll tell you. He turned to leave, but in the end, he turned his head and said, You can stay here for now. Otherwise, when I think it through, I won't be able to find you. Gu Shengyin watched his figure leave the courtyard. She said to the system with emotion, "It's already reached this point, but you didn't say it. You're not a complete slag." System. She always felt that the lovers of this world were very pitiful. Yuan Rui gathered all of his confidants and ordered them to secretly search for beauties in the world. One of his confidants had already guessed his master's thoughts. Although he hadn't personally seen the girl living in the courtyard, from the words of the palace's servants, he could imagine that she was an outstanding beauty. That kind of beauty could move a man's heart. It was a very normal thing. "Your Highness," he advised, "Your Majesty's 10,000 years of life is coming. This is definitely a good opportunity. We've prepared for this for so long, we can't let it all go to waste because of love," he earnestly advised. "Moreover, one day, you'll be able to ascend the throne. What kind of beauty can't you get?" Yuan Rui closed his eyes. She's not the same. A girl like her, in this world, there was only one. The confidant secretly said in his heart, every pair of lovers, when they're passionate, they feel that the other party is unparalleled in the world. But how long can that freshness last? He could only advise, "Your Highness, think carefully about these years. Think about our ambitions. Think about the vow you made in the past." He didn't say anything else. He firmly believed that this master of his knew what was most important to him. Yuan Rui couldn't harden his heart to speak to Gu Shengyin, but there was always someone who spoke up for him. It was still Yun Chuqing. This time, she did not bring a large number of attendants with her. Behind her were only her trusted maids who had grown up with her. She looked at Gu Shengyin with a pitiful gaze. "Miss Yulan is indeed a rare heavenly beauty. I admit that I am inferior to you." Although she said this, her tone was filled with schadenfreude. Not long ago, someone secretly told her a piece of news, which made her feel very good. "I accept your compliment. Please leave." Gu Shengyin never had a good impression of this woman. If it was any other day, Yun Chuqing would definitely be angry, but today, her expression did not change. Instead, a gratified smile appeared on her face. "Aren't you arrogant? Weren't you looking down on this young lady with your nose in the air? Who do you think you are? His Highness is so good to you only because—" Gu Shengyin heard everything she was thinking in her mind. "I came today to tell Miss Yulan something." Yun Chuqing had a kind look on her face. After all, we couldn't possibly allow Miss Yulan to not know what had happened even at this point in time. Chapter 653. By the time Yuan Rui found out what had happened and came to the small courtyard, it was already night time. Yun Chuqing had already left. The courtyard was very dark, and the servant said that Miss Yulan didn't allow the lamps to be lit. Yuan Rui walked into the room with the lamp and immediately saw Gu Shengyin sitting on the wide soft couch with her arms around her knees. Seeing him approach, Gu Shengyin just looked at him calmly. Yuan Rui's heart clenched when he saw this. She clearly had no expression, but she looked like she was crying. "Yulan," he called out to her. "I heard that you haven't eaten all day, so I brought your favorite flower honey cake." Although Yulan was transformed from a flower, she didn't have the habit of repelling each other. She loved to eat snacks made of flowers and fruits. "Yuan Rui," Gu Shengyin said faintly. "Someone came to my courtyard today and said a lot to me." Yuan Rui fell silent. "She told me that you put me in this courtyard for a reason, right?" She looked at Yuan Rui expectantly, hoping that he would say no. "Yes." Yuan Rui looked away in a sorry state. He couldn't lie to these eyes. Gu Shengyin's expression became even more confused. "You want to give me to someone else?" Yuan Rui felt that she was going to cry in the next second. His heart ached, but this was indeed what he had done. "I originally planned to do so, but Yulan, later on." He wanted to say that he regretted it later on. "Then you were so good to me before, taking me out to play and watching fireworks. Was it all on purpose?" "Yes." Gu Shengyin turned her head away and no longer looked at Yuan Rui. I know. The last thing you asked me to help you with was this, right? Yuan Rui wanted to deny it. He opened his mouth, and those unbearable images flashed through his mind. In the end, he fell silent. Gu Shengyin thought that if it was really Yulan, her heart would probably break at this moment. Okay. I promise you. She turned around and Yuan Rui could clearly see the light in her eyes. Those were tears. I will help you one last time. After that, we will be even and have nothing to do with each other. Okay. Leave. I don't want to see you again. Yuan Rui stood in the darkness for a long time, so long that Gu Shengyin thought he had left, but her body was embraced by a strong force. But this time, a white light flashed from her body and easily repelled Yuan Rui. Don't touch me again. Don't touch me again. These 6 simple words were like the heaviest hammer, ruthlessly smashing into Yuan Rui's heart, smashing it into pieces. He clutched his chest. That place hurt so much that it was difficult for him to even breathe. In the end, he left. She never came to this small courtyard again. Who allowed you to make your own decisions? He looked coldly at the person kneeling on the ground. That person was a confidant left behind by his mother and had always been by his side since he was young. Your Highness, this subordinate made his own decisions. I know that I have offended my superiors. I will never ask for your Highness' forgiveness. That person was also a stubborn person and didn't defend himself. He was the one who leaked the matter to Yun Chuqing and used her to tell the truth to Gu Shengyin. Only in this way will your Highness truly give up and remember what our purpose has always been. Chapter 654. Yuan Rui covered his face with his hand. He knew that blaming this person now was just venting his anger. The main culprit was actually himself. The atmosphere of the entire Sage King Manor became inexplicably heavy. The servants were all frightened, deeply afraid that if they made a mistake, they would be dragged out by their angry master and heavily punished. All kinds of brocade clothes and jewels were sent to Gu Shengyin's courtyard. Along with them were maids who weren't easy to serve. There were also mamas who taught her all kinds of rules. Gu Shengyin was indifferent to everything. She no longer had the kind and curious appearance she had when she first entered the manor. However, her appearance was more in line with Yuan Rui's cold and indifferent personality who didn't like to see strangers' image. Yuan Rui really didn't appear again after that night. Half a month later, on the Sage King's birthday, the Sage King presented a stunning beauty. The Emperor was overjoyed and personally praised the Sage King for being respectful and filial, a role model for princes. This was Yuan Rui's goal from the beginning. His imperial father was an idiot who only knew how to eat, drink, and play. The thing he loved the most in his life was beauties. He once joked at a palace banquet, "Zhen is the ruler of the world, but it's a pity that I can't ask for a truly stunning beauty." Yuan Rui remembered these words in his heart, and the moment he saw Gu Shengyin, he had this plan. The night Gu Shengyin was sent to the palace, the light in Yuan Rui's study didn't dim at all. The next day, it was announced that the emperor favored the beauty that night and gave a decree to bestow Jieyu. When he heard this news, he couldn't hold back and spat out a mouthful of blood. However, in reality, Gu Shengyin had only used a small spell on the emperor that night, making him hug his quilt and have an incomparably beautiful wet dream. The beauty in the palace became more and more favored, and the emperor was even unwilling to attend morning court for her. It was widely spread among the people that this Li Jieyu had the appearance of an immortal, the reincarnation of a fairy from the heavens. She was grateful for the emperor's hospitality and came down to the mortal world. Yuan Rui became more and more favored by the emperor day by day. The emperor gave him more and more power. His methods were decisive and ruthless, and he had been in hiding for many years. In a short period of time, he had taken control of the situation in the court. He should have been proud of his success, but he was getting thinner day by day. His confidants knew that there was a knot in his heart that could not be untied. That knot was Li Jieyu, who was proud of her success in the palace. Yuan Rui had seen Gu Shengyin once in the palace. She was dressed in a gorgeous palace dress and had exquisite makeup on her face. Her expression was arrogant and cold, completely different from how she used to be. When she saw him, she didn't even spare him a glance. With a burst of fragrance, she brushed past him without any reluctance. One of his followers, who didn't know what was going on, said, "Is this Li Jieyu your junior sister? Isn't it all thanks to your efforts that she has today? Now that she has gained the upper hand with just one move." The rest of his words came to an abrupt halt when he saw the horrifying expression on his face. Yes, she was the one who had given her everything. It was natural for her to hate him. Yuan Rui couldn't help but cover his chest. Since that day, he had inexplicably suffered from heart disease. Many imperial physicians had seen him, but they couldn't see the problem. But every time it flared up, it felt like his heart was about to split open. Chapter 655. Gu Shengyin was also shocked when she saw Yuan Rui's appearance. She still remembered the first time she saw him, tall and straight, handsome and spirited, possessing a charm that could move the hearts of all women. However, when she saw him just now, he had obviously lost weight. His complexion was also unhealthily pale, and there were deep dark circles under his eyes. It was obvious that he had not rested well for a long time. It went without saying who caused all this, but Gu Shengyin did not have the slightest pity for him. Since he dared to do such a thing, he should be prepared to be abused. There was still a long time, and she had prepared an even bigger surprise waiting for him. Spring Hunt. His Majesty the Emperor, who had just obtained a beauty, naturally wanted to show off his brilliance in front of her. He and Li Jieyu, who was now the most favored of the 6 palaces, rode in the same carriage and arrived at the imperial hunting ground. Gu Shengyin glanced around and saw that Yun Chuqing was also there. With her status, she did not have the qualifications to participate in such a grand event. After thinking for a moment, she understood the crux of the matter. It was probably because of her status as the secondary consort of the virtuous king. She did not know what Yuan Rui was thinking, but the matter that was originally decided was delayed just like that. The Yun family was very dissatisfied, but they did not dare to say anything. Just like that, Yun Chuqing was held back awkwardly. However, Gu Shengyin was annoyed just by looking at it. The corner of her mouth twitched, and the emperor beside her noticed it and immediately asked, "What's wrong, my beloved consort?" Gu Shengyin lazily pointed at Yun Chuqing. "I don't like that woman." In any case, she was now a source of trouble in the eyes of others, wasn't she? Then she would be unreasonable. The emperor followed her gaze, and a trace of shock flashed through his eyes. However, in the blink of an eye, he saw Gu Shengyin sitting beside him. "Yes, compared to my beloved consort, everyone is just a commoner. Since my beloved consort does not like her, then someone, take her away. Don't sit here and look like a wet blanket." Yun Chuqing's face immediately turned pale. Being publicly disliked by the emperor, what face would she have in the future? She looked at Yuan Rui as if she wanted to ask him for help. The others also looked at the fiery His Royal Highness Xian Wang. Many people knew that this young lady was his future concubine. Now that he was slapped in the face by Li Jieyu, they didn't know how he would react. Yuan Rui turned a deaf ear to these gazes. Yulan did not like the eldest daughter of the Yun family. Was it because she was his concubine? Was she still unable to let go of him in her heart? He wanted to raise his head to look at Gu Shengyin's expression, but the two of them were too far apart. He could only see a beautiful figure dressed in luxurious clothes, blurred and distant. "Didn't you hear what His Majesty said? Since you've ruined His Majesty's mood, why don't you hurry up and drag it out?" he said coldly. Many people were in an uproar. They all said that His Highness Prince Xian was cold-hearted. It was true. He could even be cruel to his own concubine. Assassins! No one knew who shouted, but a few figures suddenly jumped out from the crowd and headed straight for the emperor. "My dear concubine!" the emperor exclaimed. He did not expect that this delicate beauty would stand in front of him at a time like this. "Your Majesty, it is this concubine's honor to be able to block this blade for your Majesty." Gu Shengyin smiled weakly. From the corner of her eye, she saw Yuan Rui rushing over. "This concubine and His Highness Prince Xian are like siblings." She did not continue. Firstly, the emperor could understand what she meant. Secondly, she closed her eyes. Chapter 656. When Yuan Rui saw Gu Shengyin block the attack, he jumped up from his seat. He used all his strength to run to the emperor's side. But by the time he reached her side, she had already stopped breathing. Yuan Rui's hands couldn't help but tremble. When the emperor saw his expression, he thought he was too sad because of his junior sister's death. Of course, the spring hunt was stopped. Li Jieyu's body was brought back to the palace and the emperor ordered a grand funeral. But that night, Li Jieyu's palace caught fire and everything was burned to ashes. Not even a complete corpse was left behind. The emperor could only sigh. Yuan Rui personally carried Yulan's corpse and placed it in his room. The servants in his room were all deaf and mute. He wasn't afraid they would leak the secret. "Yulan, you must hate me, right? You should hate me, but if you hate me, you should take revenge. Why did you say those things? What brother and sister?" Even in death, she was still thinking about him. Yuan Rui spoke and coughed violently. Bright red blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, but he didn't want to wipe it away. He touched her face with trembling hands. She was still beautiful, but cold and stiff to the touch. It was the smell of death. "I'm a bastard. I won't die a good death. It's me who caused you to be in this state." His Highness Xian Wang became thinner and thinner day by day. His temperament became more and more gloomy. Even when the emperor gave him the title of crown prince at the court meeting, there was no smile on his face. This made many court officials secretly praise the Xian Wang. No, the crown prince's temperament was extraordinary. Yuan Rui was at a loss. Becoming the crown prince and finally ascending to the supreme throne, trampling everyone under his feet, was his life's greatest goal. But now, almost all of it had been achieved. Why didn't he feel happy at all? Perhaps it was because his heart had already turned cold following that person's departure? Returning to the palace in a daze, Yuan Rui turned a blind eye to all the congratulations and closed himself in his room. But the figure that should have been lying on the bed was gone. Gone? A trace of panic flashed through his heart. How could it disappear? He looked carefully and finally saw a withered camellia flower on the bed. An idea suddenly flashed through his mind. That's right, she wasn't human at all. How could she be judged by human standards? Yuan Rui let out a low chuckle. In the end, that chuckle gradually turned into laughter. In the end, he laughed until he couldn't stop coughing. Even so, he did not stop laughing. His eyes lit up, and a glimmer of hope suddenly spread out in the deathly stillness. "You lied to me, you lied to everyone. But thank you for lying to me this time. She wasn't dead. She was still alive. There was nothing more delightful than this." Even if she hated him and didn't want to see him again, it didn't matter. The people in the prince's mansion realized that their master's mood had inexplicably improved. The emperor's body could not take it anymore. His body had been hollowed out by wine and women all these years. After a serious illness, his entire body collapsed. Crown Prince Yuan Rui quickly took control of the court. Chapter 657. Beat him to death. He stole food. Beat him. In this magnificent palace of the Ming Kingdom, there was no lack of such a place. A group of 7 or 8-year-old children dressed in gorgeous clothes were surrounding a child of the same age, punching and kicking him. And the reason was that this child had secretly taken a pastry that the second prince used to feed fish. The child who stole the pastry was Yuan Rui. From the moment he was born, he lived in the cold palace. His mother was a crazy woman, and the only normal person was an old nanny who took care of him. That nanny told him that his mother used to be the emperor's most favored concubine. Because she was framed, even though she was pregnant, she was sent to the cold palace by the emperor who hated her. And he, who was born in the cold palace, was naturally not a noble prince. His life was even more humble than most of the servants. Those eunuchs and palace maids, at least, did not have to worry about not having enough to eat or wear. Since he was young, he had been taught by nannies that he should be one of the most noble people in the world. He was a prince, and he was above others. When he was being beaten, he looked at the second prince, who was wearing a jeweled necklace and watching casually. This idea of being above others became clearer than ever. He began to work hard. There were no famous teachers in the cold palace to teach him, so he secretly begged those soft-hearted palace maids to bring him books. Then, the old nanny who could read a few words would teach him to read under the dim oil lamp. She could not do it during the day, because during the day, the nanny had to go to the laundry bureau to work. When he grew up, he went to get a set of eunuch clothes. Every time he went to the upper study room, he stood outside and listened to the Grand Tutor's teachings to the princes. Anyway, he was a forgotten prince, and no one recognized him. Later, it seemed that the Empress Dowager was seriously ill. In order to pray for her, the emperor pardoned the world, and he, a prince in the cold palace, finally came out. Then, little by little, he gave up his dignity, put down his face, and put down his everything. Step by step, from a prince who had nothing, he gradually put his name in front of the emperor. Then, he began to take on some tasks that were neither light nor heavy. Later, there was the virtuous king. Unfortunately, by the time he had the power to control the life and death of others, his mother couldn't hold on any longer and had been left in that empty palace forever. Even the old nanny, who had placed all her hopes on him, did not live to see the day she could enjoy her life. He had always been alone. Therefore, he regarded the emperor's favor as very important. He knew that if he wanted to climb higher, he had to understand the emperor's intentions. That night at the banquet, the drunk emperor looked at the bright moon in the sky and muttered to himself, "I am the emperor, and I am rich in the world. But in the end, I can't ask for a peerless beauty. It is a regret in my life." He kept these words in mind and secretly began to search for those beauties. In the beginning, he went to the Yun residence only because the eldest miss of their family, Yun Chuqing, was known as the #1 beauty of the Ming kingdom. But unexpectedly, there was an unexpected harvest. He watched as the immortal-like woman took form within the flower. When she looked over, it was as if 10,000 flowers had bloomed. He knew that he had found the person. She was a peerless beauty capable of causing the downfall of a city. However, he did not expect that she would also be able to topple his heart. Chapter 658. During the winter, the emperor's illness was already beyond cure. Yuan Rui was covered in a thick cloak, and beside him were palace servants holding an umbrella. His heart ailment had never been cured. Yun Chuqing was sent back to the Yun family after the spring hunt. A woman who had been reprimanded by the emperor naturally had no way to enter the imperial family, even if it was only as a side consort. Even families with a little bit of status were unwilling to have a daughter-in-law who had been reprimanded by the emperor and almost became the crown prince's side consort. In the end, she only married the second wife of a person who had passed the imperial examinations. Yuan Rui returned to the prince's estate. Although he was already the crown prince, he spent most of his time in the virtuous prince's estate, or rather, in the small courtyard where she used to live. In fact, even he himself felt that his actions were extremely pretentious. He had pushed her away with his own hands. Now that she had really left, he had to act like a saint of love. He stood in the middle of the courtyard with his eyes closed. He tilted his head as if he was listening to some sound. She used to love sitting in this place and playing the zither. He acted like this, imagining that she was still here. Then, he was caught off guard by the sudden pain in his heart and fainted. "Your Highness is suffering from a heart ailment. This old official is powerless." In a daze, he heard such a conversation. Then, His personal servant complained about the imperial physician's incompetence. Later, he fell asleep again in a daze. When he woke up, he found that the people around him all had worried expressions. "What's wrong?" He faintly guessed that this was related to him. His personal servant's face was pale. "The imperial physician said that your heart ailment has never been encountered before. I'm afraid it can't be cured." Yuan Rui laughed. "Life and death are predestined. There's no need to force it." The emperor, who had been addicted to sensual pleasures for a long time, didn't know why, but he suddenly felt a bit of fatherly love for this son who had always been easy to deal with. He personally came to see his sick son and even offered a large reward, announcing to the world that as long as the crown prince's illness could be cured, there would be a great reward. Unfortunately, wave after wave of divine doctors came and went, but the crown prince's body rapidly deteriorated day after day. Until one day, an old divine doctor with a white beard and wide sleeves entered the prince's estate. "Your Highness, are you suffering because of love?" The white-bearded old man pondered for a while and said this. Yuan Rui's expression changed slightly as he coughed twice. "Godly doctor, you must be joking." The white-bearded miracle doctor didn't pursue the matter when he saw that Luo Yunyang didn't admit it. Instead, he said slowly, "Your Highness's body can't be treated using ordinary methods." In other words, there was a way? Yuan Rui's attendant's eyes lit up. He respectfully asked, "Does the godly doctor have a way?" The white-bearded old man shook his head and said when everyone was disappointed, "I can't do anything. I just happened to come across an incomplete medical book in the past, and it just so happened that it recorded the treatment method for this kind of heart disease. I need to find a flower king that is over 10,000 years old, take its flower heart, and boil it into a medicinal juice. Only then can I cure it." However, he didn't know if he could find a 10,000-year-old flower king anywhere in the world. The white-bearded old man left. He couldn't treat this illness, so naturally, he wouldn't stay here. The attendant couldn't help but grumble, "I don't know where this old man came from, but he's so weird. What does he mean by 10,000-year-old womanizer? This is simply unheard of." Yuan Rui thought of a certain figure. He secretly smiled. In this life, it would be difficult for him to see her again. Chapter 659. Yuan Rui grew weaker day by day. In the end, he couldn't even sit up. He could only lie on the bed, emaciated and on the verge of death. Everyone felt that he couldn't live anymore. The ministers in the imperial court were even thinking that they should write a memorial to suggest who would be better after the crown prince passed away. Today, the weather was very good. For the first time, Yuan Rui was much more spirited. He even ordered his personal servants to help him up and walk around the courtyard. The servant's heart trembled, as if he sensed something. He didn't dare to say anything. According to the crown prince's orders, he put on a thick fox fur coat and helped him to the courtyard. Of course, it was still the courtyard that Yuan Rui didn't allow others to set foot in. No one had lived here for a long time, but it was still clean and tidy. In the past, when Yuan Rui was in good health, he would personally come here every 2 days to clean it. Now that he was in bad health, he had ordered his trusted subordinates to come and clean it on time. Those who had once given him ideas were now filled with regret. If they had known that their master cared so much about that person, why would they have come up with such a rotten idea? Now, it was all good. Their yearning had come true, but their master's appearance. What was the point? Yuan Rui sat alone in the courtyard for an entire day. He didn't touch the food that the servants brought up. Gu Shengyin was actually here. She used a technique to hide her figure and sat on a tall branch of the largest tree in the courtyard. She silently looked at Yuan Rui, who was so thin that he didn't even look human. She sat on the tree and watched for as long as he sat there. The system couldn't stand it anymore. "Host, he looks so pitiful." Gu Shengyin revealed a slightly cold smile. If Yulan was just a normal person, or if it was just Yulan and not me, she would have died in the palace long ago. How could she see this scene of deep affection? She admitted that Yuan Rue looked quite pitiful like this, but what was that saying again? A pitiful person must have a hateful side. The things he did, this degree of repayment was not enough. In this world, she didn't plan on letting him live so easily. Can one be forgiven if one repents after doing something wrong? Most of the time, the person who could forgive him would not wait for him to repent. Your deep feelings came too late. She glanced at the person sitting there one last time before her figure flashed and disappeared. Yuan Rue seemed to have sensed something and suddenly raised his head to look in the direction she had been staring at. However, other than the rustling of the leaves in the wind, there was nothing else. After returning, Yuan Rue fell into a coma. No matter how hard the imperial physicians tried, they couldn't wake him up. Everyone knew that the crown prince was at the end of his rope. The Ministry of Rites was already preparing for the funeral, just waiting for them to take their last breath. Yuan Rue was muddle-headed, but he knew in his heart that he was about to leave. His only thought now was to see that girl again and tell her that he had let her down. He didn't ask for her forgiveness, he just wanted to tell her that he regretted it. Perhaps it was heaven's mercy that he really saw her. In the silent darkness, it was as if she stepped on light and appeared in his world. Chapter 660. Host, are you really going to do this? The host's heart was a bit distressed. This was too cruel. Gu Shengyin nodded. System, remember this. The highest level of torment is never torment the body. System, it suddenly misses the time when it was just born, when it was the host with a face full of innocence and confusion. Yuan Rue stood up. He was in a dark space, surrounded by thick darkness. The only source of light was Gu Shengyin, who was standing in front of him. He couldn't help but smile. Am I hallucinating, or are you finally willing to see me? Gu Shengyin was still the same as he remembered. She looked at Yuan Rue with undisguised hatred. I hate you, Yuan Rue. Yuan Rue didn't find it strange. Instead, he nodded in agreement. I did something so wrong. You should hate me. He suddenly became affectionate. He stared at Gu Shengyin without blinking. He was afraid that if he lost focus, she would disappear. It looks like the heavens haven't been unkind to me. Right now, the only thing I want is to see you before I die. I want to tell you that I'm sorry. Gu Shengyin looked at him silently. Suddenly she said, You won't die. She suddenly smiled and looked at Yuan Rue. I hate you. I want to end your life with my own hands. But when I found out that you were about to die. She held her chest with one hand. Here, it really hurts. Yuan Rue's eyes trembled. He seemed to understand something. His voice was trembling. He said to Gu Shengyin, Yulan, listen. I, Yuan Rue, am where I am today. It's all because of my own actions. I deserve it. I'm sorry. I was so good to you, but it was all fake. I know. Gu Shengyin looked at him quietly. She smiled and smiled until tears fell. I know you're just using me. I hate you to the core, but I still can't bear to see you die. So, Yuan Rue, you have to live on well. She said faintly. In front of Yuan Rue, the hand that was covering his chest, without hesitation, plunged deep into his chest. There was no blood spurting out, but a fist-sized white flower appeared in her hand. That flower looked exactly the same as it did before she transformed into a human form. No. No, Yulan. Yuan Rue tried his best to approach and stop her, but he realized that he couldn't move at all. His tears flowed out and his eyes were bloodshot. He watched as the white flower turned into specks of white starlight and flew towards him before disappearing into his body. His body, which had always been weak and powerless, suddenly became filled with strength, as if he had been reborn. But Yuan Rue couldn't care less about that. He watched helplessly as the person in front of him's black hair turned white inch by inch from the roots. Her face also turned from rosy to pale white. It was so white that it was almost transparent. He didn't know when his body could move again. He desperately wanted to approach her, but he realized that no matter how hard he tried, he could never reach her. "Goodbye, Yuan Rue," she whispered to him. Yuan Rue's eyes suddenly opened. "Your Highness, you're awake. The heavens are really protecting my Ming country." You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.